How can a dream of utopia, built on promises of equality and refuge, turn into the biggest collective nightmare of the 20th century? What leads hundreds of parents to willingly give cyanide to their own children? Can blind faith truly be more dangerous than war? To answer this, we need to go back to the starting point and unravel the dark transformation of a charismatic preacher who promised heaven on earth but delivered hell in the jungle. Everything culminated in a single day. Exactly on November 18th, 1978, when the Jonestown Massacre revealed the most brutal face of mass manipulation to the world. What was a community of 1,000 people became a field of corpses in a matter of minutes. On that day, more than 900 lives were extinguished, including 304 children, confirming the somber title, The Minute That Utopia Turned into Tragedy. On November 18th, the Jonestown Massacre marked the day that changed everything. This fateful day did not begin with gunfire, but with a voice that of Jim Jones, announcing the revolutionary suicide to his followers. In Jonestown, an isolated community deep in the Guyanese jungle, 918 people, nearly one-third of them 304 children and minors, consumed a lethal mixture of cyanide, Valium, and Flavor Aid. This was not an act of spontaneous despair, but the meticulously planned climax of Jim Jones' reign. The world did not know immediately, but when the horrific images surfaced, revealing hundreds of bodies scattered under the equatorial sun, America was forced to confront the terrible price of blind faith. The promise of equality and refuge, which attracted disillusioned minorities and idealists from the US, had irrevocably devolved into absolute tyranny. Jonestown was not a paradise. It was a prison where the only permitted exit was death. This event, the largest mass suicide in modern history, is not just about the body count. It is about how hope, when channeled into authoritarian fanaticism, becomes the most efficient poison. The real question is not what Jones did, but how he convinced almost 1,000 people to willingly take that final, bitter sip. The answer lies in the journey from faith to paranoia we are about to unravel. The blind faith that led Jones to build the People's Temple in the jungles of Guyana was no longer a refuge. It was a cage, heavily guarded by the thick humidity and Jones's spiraling paranoia. The invasion he had always prophesied arrived on November 17, 1978, in the form of US Congressman Leo Ryan, accompanied by worried relatives and journalists. Ryan was not there to condemn, but to inspect and offer a lifeline. Yet, when the first settlers attempted to defect, asking to accompany Ryan back to the US, Jones's meticulous edifice of control began to shatter. This moment of betrayal transformed Jones's messianic complex into terminal authoritarian panic. November 18, 1978, the Port Kaitama airstrip. As Ryan and his delegation prepared to depart, a tractor, seemingly innocuous, approached the plane. Then, chaos erupted. Armed temple guards ambushed the group, firing hundreds of rounds. Congressman Ryan was shot 45 times, killed alongside 3 journalists and 1 defector. He became the only sitting US congressman ever assassinated in the line of duty. The massacre at the airstrip sealed the fate of everyone back in the commune. Jones's persecution complex had become a chilling reality, ensuring there was now no turning back. Back in Jonestown, the news of the attack was the signal for the final white night. This was not an exercise. Jim Jones, sweat dripping from his face, his voice distorted and amplified by the speakers, ordered everyone to gather. He preached about the imminent destruction by external forces, declaring, "If we cannot live in peace, we must die in protest." The preparation for the final ritual was sickeningly swift. Cyanide, Valium, and sedatives were mixed into a large vat of grape-flavored drink, a cheap powder known as Flavor Aid, not Kool-Aid, a common, yet crucial, historical distinction. The horror was immediate and systematic. Mothers were forced to administer the poison to their children first, often through plastic syringes. The sounds of crying and coughing mixed with Jones's chilling final exhortations, all meticulously recorded on tape for posterity. Those who resisted were often forced at gunpoint. In less than 10 minutes, the entire community of 918 people, 304 of whom were children, was silenced. The images that followed, of a carpet of bodies lying still beneath the tropical sun, were shocking to the world. Jonestown was, statistically, the largest single loss of American civilian life in a deliberate act until the attacks of September 11, 2001. The tragedy was not merely the loss of life, but the complete inversion of hope. How could hundreds of educated, idealistic people, seeking escape from American oppression, willingly surrender to such a brutal, centralized execution? The immediate facts are clear, but the deeper, more disturbing question remains: what psychological machinery did Jim Jones deploy to ensure that, in that final, critical minute, loyalty proved stronger than the primal instinct for survival? The answer, the terrible logic behind that final, critical minute, was not found in a single dose of poison, but in years of relentless psychological erosion and a seductive promise sold to a deeply fractured America. The United States of the 1960s and 70s was a cauldron of disillusionment. Vietnam, civil rights struggles, Watergate, institutional trust was shattered. People were searching for refuge, for meaning, for a truly equitable society. Jim Jones offered precisely that: a radical, racially integrated rainbow family built on socialist principles, promising salvation not in the next life, but here and now. Jones understood the power of the marginalized. Approximately 70% of the People's Temple members were African American, drawn by a leader who actively campaigned against segregation and institutional racism, often decades ahead of mainstream America. For those who had suffered generations of oppression, the promise of a collective, safe society, a promised land, was intoxicating. Jones's early work was genuinely admirable, establishing soup kitchens and running successful political campaigns in Indiana and San Francisco, positioning the temple as a legitimate social force. But behind the facade of radical equality lay the blueprint for absolute control. As scrutiny intensified, driven by critical media reports and defectors, accounts of physical abuse and financial fraud, Jones executed his great escape. In 1977, hundreds of loyal members were airlifted to the deep jungle of Guyana, to a remote agricultural settlement they christened Jonestown. This move was framed as escaping the fascist persecutions of the American government and media. Jonestown was marketed as a socialist paradise, free from capitalism and racism. The reality was a prison camp disguised as a utopia. Isolation was the key. 918 inhabitants, surrounded by dense, nearly impenetrable jungle, miles from any real communication. Jones systematically broke down individual autonomy. Members were forced to hand over all assets, work 11-hour days, and endure constant surveillance. Sleep deprivation was routine. Public humiliation and physical punishment were instruments of conformity. Jones demanded they call him father or dad. He became the sole source of food, shelter, and information. His most insidious tool was the White Nights, mandatory emergency drills, often held in the middle of the night, where members practiced ritualistic mass suicide, what Jones termed revolutionary suicide. The first few times, the drink was harmless. It was a loyalty test. By November 18, 1978, this ritual had been normalized, institutionalized. The community was so conditioned that when Congressman Leo Ryan arrived, the first and only U.S. official to visit Jonestown and witnessed the despair, the fear, and the requests for immediate departure, the fragile structure shattered. Ryan represented the outside world, the chance for freedom, and Jones knew his power could not survive that exposure. Ryan's decision to help the defectors escape sealed his own fate, leading to his murder on the Port Kaitama airstrip shortly after leaving Jonestown. But the violence didn't end there. Back in the pavilion, Jones had already set his final, unthinkable plan in motion. The utopia was dead. The minute the first syringe of cyanide was prepared, it became purely a tragedy, engineered by a despot who preferred mutual destruction to the loss of control. The question remains, when the faith that promised equality becomes a mandate for death, what compels hundreds of people, mostly parents, to carry out the ultimate, horrific act against their own children? That requires examining the chilling final hours and the sound evidence of the conspiracy that stretched far beyond Jones himself. The loyalty Jim Jones forged was not based on shared belief, but on absolute terror, isolation, and dependence. The final mechanism Jones employed to ensure fatal obedience was the removal of all possible escape routes, making the final command feel like the only remaining shared destiny. On November 18, 1978, in that tiny, remote clearing in the Guyanese jungle, utopia ceased to be a promise and became a statistical horror. 909 people died that day. It was the largest non-natural single-event loss of American civilian life until the attacks of September 11, 2001. Among the dead were 276 children, innocent victims, whose short lives were brutally terminated by the narcissistic delusion of a single man. Jonestown was not just a historical anomaly. It was the moment the word cult solidified its modern, terrifying meaning in the global lexicon. The murder of Congressman Leo Ryan, the only sitting congressman ever assassinated in the line of duty, sent shockwaves through Washington, demonstrating the deadly reach of internal fanaticism and directly influencing how religious movements would be scrutinized globally thereafter. But the lasting wound is philosophical, captured forever in the grim cultural shorthand, drinking the Kool-Aid. Although the poison was actually flavor aid, the idiom signifies the ultimate, fatal submission to a rotten ideology. The moment reason yields entirely to faith in a false prophet, the legacy of Jonestown forced the world to ask a painful question. How much sovereignty are we willing to surrender in exchange for a feeling of belonging? Today, the jungle has largely reclaimed the physical compound. Yet, the principles that fueled the tragedy persist, echoing ominously in the digital age. Jones used physical isolation and controlled information to create an echo chamber. Now, polarized digital communities and powerful charismatic figures leverage algorithms and disinformation to achieve ideological capture on a massive, rapid scale. When we see people retreating into groups defined by absolute truth and rejecting external reality, we are watching the dark potential of Jonestown unfold once more, just without the physical walls of the jungle. The lesson of November 18th is that the search for utopia, when placed entirely in the hands of a flawed authoritarian leader, swiftly becomes the blueprint for hell. The horror of Jonestown is a perpetual warning. The minute you stop questioning the source of your comfort, you risk trading your freedom and, perhaps your life, for the poison.